It's interesting how important games are to children. I think they always have been. I think playfulness has been absolutely at the heart of children's engagement, probably for 3,000 years. So in some ways there is nothing new when video games are stirred into the mix. And in the very early days of computing, I think we were very excited that the engagement we saw with children on a screen which was interactive rather than passive was genuinely seductive, genuinely compelling.
Children's gaming habits have developed quite substantially into just a normal mainstream activity as the use of the internet has developed as well for them as part of their everyday media landscape. So some research that we did at Channel 4 found that gaming is their favourite leisure activity over and above television or spending time with friends and family, although the number of hours that they do spending time with friends and family or watching television is greater than games. But it's very clear to us that gaming is a very important part of the majority of young people from the age of 3+ lives. And gaming has become something that's its own art form and its own very, very strong industry within Britain. So gaming is a mainstream activity for our audience in particular and for younger audiences.
Barns spillvaner har utviklet seg i form av at barn spiller mer og mer. Og spillvanene har jo stort sett utviklet seg fordi at spillene har utviklet seg. Så det er en naturlig sammenheng her. Og denne utviklingen som gjør at barn spiller mer og mer, og at spillene blir mer og mer omfattende, gjør jo at det også da er større og større behov for at foreldre eller andre som omgås barn og unge både kjenner til hvordan spillene er, og hvordan de kan regulere det, både før spillet kommer i hus, men også underveis som spilleren blir bedre og bedre, og som kanskje må bruke mer og mer tid for å komme videre i spillet.
I personally kind of grew up on video games in a large degree. I think that, there's been study after study that shows there's the obvious things like manual dexterity and the ability, kind of hand-eye coordination and spatial awareness. There's been some very interesting studies, less on children, but I know that surgeons, as example, surgeons who play games perform far better in kind of complex laparoscopic surgery tasks, for example, than surgeons who don't play games. So the kind of hand-eye coordination is particularly good around kids. But I think also it's about problem solving. I know that system theory and system thinking is particularly important. Patience. One of the interesting things I heard is that kids who regularly play games don't give up on tasks quite so quickly because they always perceive that there is a solution. Obviously in video games there's always a solution, there's always a way out of a scenario.
Så det er viktig at vi har mestringsarenaer hvor vi får positiv feedback på at vi er gode, og at vi betyr noe.
It's also very interesting that games encourage failure to a certain extent, which is how you learn. You make a mistake or you don't get through level 1 and you realise what you have to do and you go back and play in order to get through and progress through a game and through the story. So it's very helpful in general, I think, for young people and learning about how to navigate life and how to level up in life.
So there's kind of lots of things, and also there's more and more studies coming out about how actually computer games help you become more social. It kind of sounds slightly the antithesis of what people believe, that computer games are about locking yourself in a bedroom and just playing games. But actually, there's been studies, plenty of studies that show that games that have a kind of pro-social message, so games that are about helping other people, children that play those games come away being much more pro-social and wanting to help other people.
And there are some games like Limbo, for instance, which is a game about death, which are beautiful works of art, and they really, really evoke quite a lot of emotion and empathy through the story and through the gameplay. And this is really important for children's development. It's just like reading a classic novel at an early age. One of the first books I read was The Hobbit, and I was just addicted to the story and the characters. And if I could have played through that story in different ways throughout a long period of time, I would have been even more engaged, just as engaged as I was reading the novel. And I think people very much underplay that aspect of games.
Also, obviously, the whole physical play side of things really has obviously taken computer and video games away from being a very sedentary, sit on the sofa and just play type pastime to a kind of stand up and get involved, particularly with things like Connect, where it's much more about getting up the sofa and dancing or running or jumping or kind of using a whole physical movement and physical play. I also think that, interestingly, they're great levelers. So something like Connect, for example, I can play a game with my 3-year-old son, whereas he doesn't understand how controllers work, and that's a real barrier for him, and he picks up the controller and doesn't really know what's going on. But yeah, I can now play Connect games with him just as effectively as I could if he was 6, 7, 8, 9, because we're on the same playing field. We can both run up and down, and we can both kind of jump when we're told to jump. So actually it's a great way of kind of removing some of the barriers and actually making it much more of a kind of genuine cooperative or challenging experience. So I think Connect and we, what they've done is they first of all make it a much more physical type activity, and secondly they've just made it much more easier for anyone and everyone to get involved in gaming. The PEGI age system, the PEGI rating system, stands for the Pan-European Gaming Information. And the idea behind it is a way for parents, it's a resource for parents to quickly and easily see how appropriate a game is. So if it's a 3 or a 16 or an 18, it's basically saying this is the age that we think your child should be before they're able to play it.
I tillegg så da alle spillene merket med en del symboler som sier noe om innholdet.
When you're looking at age limits, it's like anything else, I think. Age limits are a guidance, and each kid is different, each child is different. And really what you have to do is to understand how mature is your child emotionally to deal with certain things that stories bring up. So
how should parents relate to that? Well, in my opinion, parents should be relating to those in the same way that they do with film classifications. That if a game is an 18 game, then the child under the age of the 18 shouldn't be playing with it. If a game is a 16, then it's a 16 the same. It's not a kind of, again, in my opinion, it's not a guide. It should be treated as law. It's not an unnecessary censorship that's in place just to be a spoil sport. It's there for a good reason. It's some smart people have looked at it and gone, you know what, this is inappropriate for that age. So yeah, it should be followed closely, very, very closely.
For å forklare det, så det viktig at man forteller hvorfor det satt en grense, og hvorfor det sånn at jeg som forelder ikke ønsker at du skal spille den type spill.
So if parents would play the games and talk to the children, they'd see what it is they're making the judgment about, and make the judgment yourself. Don't just rely on the age on the box, because the age on the box might say suitable for 12-year-olds, but you might think, well, actually my 12-year-old, that's going to frighten the pants off him. He's going to have nightmares for the next 10 years. So I think I'll wait till he's 14. Trust your judgment, parents.
Nå det alltid sånn at en forelder må ta ansvar for å sette egne regler i eget hjem. Så selv om det sånn at nabogutten får lov til å gjøre noe, så betyr jo ikke det at man skal fraskrive seg selv sin egen foreldreautoritet.
Bare det at man som forelder sier at du får ikke lov, har en effekt. Jeg tror jo faktisk at det har en effekt. At når mine barn ser på en film eller spiller et spill, blir eksponert for noe som de vet at mamma har sagt at dette fikk jeg ikke lov til, så vil det ha en effekt på virkningen av det de ser på.
I was in the cinema the other day watching James, the first of the new James Bond movies, a Daniel Craig one, and there was a parent in there with a very young child who was horrified by the brutality of some of the scenes in it, and that child should not have been in the cinema. And I'm sure the child said to their parent, "Oh, I've got to see James Bond, everybody else has seen it." And they'll say the same about the games they want to play. Parents have got to trust their judgment on all this and know what's right and know what's appropriate. But don't just impose those rules. Say to children, and here's why. Be in a conversation about it, and that's just fine.
Hvis det sånn at mange får lov til å spille spill som da kanskje har en høyere aldersgrense enn hva barna selv så jo det et flott tema å ta opp i vennegjengen.
Det vel ikke så stor grunn til å tro at det som en forelder strever med, strever ikke den andre foreldren med i det hele tatt.
Det sånn at vi som foreldre sammen skal sette oss ned og lage noen grenser, som for eksempel kan være at vi skal kun tillate spill med en grense som samsvarer med alder på barnet.
Massively multiplayer online games are large virtual worlds, if you like, that exist in perpetuity. So they continue to exist. So they don't start and stop when you start and stop the game. So they are ongoing worlds that are running, and you jump into them and you play within them, and then you kind of step out of them. So what they are is they are very large environments. They usually have their own sets of laws and rules. They usually have their own sets of a social hierarchy and a caste structure. They usually have a set of working rules. They have laws. Some are lawless and therefore kind of inherently problematic with that. Some have missions that you need to go and achieve. Usually they have some form of level. So you start off at the bottom rung and your idea is to work up the rungs. But how you do that, it's a very, very flexible environment.
There are so many positive sides to social activity in MMOs. There are lots and lots of examples of where a 14-year-old or a 13-year-old has become head of a guild in World of Warcraft or another MMO, similar kind of structure. And they learn about how to run a team and how to manage people and how to assign roles and responsibilities and how to hold people accountable. You know, it's exactly what you do when you come into a particular type of job where you're running a team, you're managing people, you're understanding where one player is not performing up to scratch, you know, and you're asking them why and you're holding them accountable again. There are other really positive aspects just around asset management, talking to people, hanging out with your friends, encountering different people. In MMOs, there are all sorts of different people who are parts of guilds. You might a 13-year-old might be playing with a 67-year-old. You know, there are different sort of generations who all take part in MMOs, and you encounter people of difference that you might not encounter in your everyday life so much, because people tend to hang out with people who are similar with them in face-to-face communities and contexts.
Some of the most famous MMOs, some of the ones that probably most people have heard of, things like World of Warcraft, which is a very much, it's probably aging slightly older of the range, if you like. So it's probably more likely to be 12, 13 plus typically. Very fantasy driven, very like Lord of the Rings, I guess, in the fact that there's elves and warlocks and wizards, so kind of magics and castes and species that don't exist in the real world, if you like. Again, very much driven around missions, so you pick a certain caste, so you want to be an elf, for example, and then you do a whole bunch of missions to try and be a better and better and better elf, or a better assassin, or a better trader, or whatever it is that you're trying to be.
Så har vi skytespill og strategispill, som en annen gruppe av disse spillene. Det som felles for dem, det at det spill som foregår over nettet via servere, som gjør at hundrevis og tusenvis av mennesker kan spille samtidig i virtuelle spillverdener.
So that's kind of almost at one end. And then in many respects at the other end you've got Moshi Monsters and Club Penguin, which are kind of, you're a little monster that goes around the world, and in a similar way you pick the type of penguin or you pick the type of Moshi that you want to be, and there's missions. It's probably less around slaying dragons, but much more around playing a little game or having a snowball fight, as an example. And then you've kind of got the middle ground, so things like Habbo Hotel, RuneScape. There are many MMOs that kind of came out, particularly off the back of Club Penguin's huge success. Many MMOs came into this space to try and kind of capitalize on that. Children often, they kind of have two stages of life development. The first stage is about who am I, and the second stage is about how do I fit in. So children who want to understand who they are, so for example, you could say that Club Penguin and Moshi Monster is an MMO. they want to trial who they are. They're kind of struggling with, what do I want to look like? How do I want to be? What kind of things do I want to enjoy? And then it allows them to trial real life in many respects. It allows them to try and fail at things. So in many respects, they're a fantastic tool for kids to try and experiment with real life. You know, and then as you get older about how they fit in, it allows children to experiment with social scenarios. It allows them to experiment with being a member of two different tribes, if you like, and how that can play off against each other and how they want to fit in. So, you know, in some respects, people think that that children should be doing that in the real world, that, you know, if children want to trial social experiences and see what it's like to be, you know, obnoxious for a day, that they should maybe do that in real life, but maybe that could be more damaging to try obnoxious for a day in the real world, whereas it might actually be quite safe to try obnoxious and see the consequences of obnoxious in a massively multiplayer online game. So you can see the massive benefits to children because it allows them to be whoever they want to be.
It's very interesting that people's ability to solve problems with games has become so important that I think it will become important in their working lives as well. I've just been asked to help redesign the way that air traffic controllers are trained. And they have a lot of stuff to learn and they have a lot of problems to solve, otherwise the aircraft would all collide. And one of the things we did was to take existing air traffic controllers, get them to play games, find out the games that they were good at, and now we're saying to recruit air traffic controllers, let's find people that are good at those games and we'll put them on the training course. So games, I think, could become an important filter for employment. There's a company in Oxford that if you want to get a job there, online on the website, you have to play a game which is full of puzzles, and if you can't solve the puzzles, you can't get to the application form, because they only want people that can think ingeniously, and they're using games to filter them out. So games, I think, are just going to become economically important as well as intellectually and socially. That will be very interesting, won't it? Interesting for parents.